Lekha Surasani talking about tales of using Phoenix LiveView at an early stage startup. But a little bit first about Lekha. Currently working as a senior software engineer at AdPipe. She's worked with a variety of technologies, including Ruby, Rails, React, Elixir, Phoenix LiveView, and primarily works at startups. In her free time, she likes to travel and go on long walks in her city, not on the beach. Everybody get over for Lekha.
Yeah, definitely not on the beach, just to clarify. I don't like beaches. But yeah, my name is Lekha Surasani, and I'm here today to talk to you about how our company, AdPipe, has been using Phoenix LiveView. Lucky enough to be also graced by the presence of the rest of my team, for the most part, save a few people. So if you see them around, say hello. I'm gonna go back a little bit and talk a little bit about my experience first. So I've got about 6 years under my belt just working in a variety of sized companies, some as small as like 10 to the last job I had, we had left about 800 people. So yeah, I'm definitely most comfortable though in that like 20 to like 200 person range, and have found the most general enjoyment out of that. So a lot of the experiences I will be describing today will be a comparison to that general experience. A little bit about how we've been using Elixir. Personally, I've been using Elixir for the last 4 years, since about 2020. I picked it up at a previous job, and then when I moved to AdPipe in September, they were using it fully for Phoenix LiveView. So starting at AdPipe was actually the first time I used Phoenix LiveView in production. I think I'd done like a tutorial for it at some point, but this was the first time I was actually, pushing code to production that actual people were using for LiveView. All right, so in order to talk about AdPipe, I do have to talk about our team makeup a little bit so you have the full context of what we're doing. So this is a diagram of the group of people who actually work on our Phoenix LiveView app. AdPipe as a Phoenix LiveView app, I think started sometime in the 21, 22 range before my time. We don't care about that. Just kidding. We've got a UI engineer and a full stack engineer who started it all. And then we hired a bunch more full stack engineers. Our original full stack engineer became the head of engineering, got busy, you know how it goes. And then finally, currently, we have pretty much the same team, but also hired somebody who's doing hybrid PM, like UI engineer stuff. So we've got a good collection of people with a good collection of hybrid roles, but overall, maintaining a relatively small team of 7 people actively working on our Phoenix LiveView app. The app itself, I just pulled this from GitHub, is, as you can see, mostly Elixir. We have a bit of JavaScript. We use that, and I'll get into it a little bit more later, but we do have a bit of just like plain JavaScript, just nothing fancy, just JavaScript. And then we have HTML, CSS, standard, Rust for font parsing, and then separately we use AWS mostly for our deployment and storage. So yeah, it's been nice to be able to look at this in particular. The 82% Elixir feels great, personally. It has been amazing what we can accomplish with just LiveView and not having to go in and write that much actual like raw HTML JavaScript. Okay, so to start out, I think we have to talk a little bit about why LiveView. I will give a shout out to my manager, Dan, in the crowd for providing a lot of the context. This is before we were there. But in order to talk about LiveView, I'm just gonna do like a brief overview of what LiveView is for those of you who might not know. But basically, LiveView is a process that receives events, updates its state, and renders updates to the page as diffs. So instead of a traditional re-rendering of state that happens when you get new information from like a traditional SPA. LiveView is smart enough to just send the information that changed, which means that it updates the client pretty quickly. Essentially, the entire thing is driven by a user action, for example, that could come from the browser. And LiveView on the back end, you do the things, whatever your code wants to do, you push the changes back, and then the front end updates. So it ends up being very seamless overall as a user experience. But the interesting thing about this is that this also allows you to do the same thing, but from the server side. So this allows for a lot of async stuff to be happening in the background. I haven't mentioned yet what AdPipe actually is. It's a company that allows you to basically upload photos, videos, and then make social media posts, for example, from those photos and videos. So it's a lot of photo and video processing. So for example, in our app, a user might upload a photo or a video, and then they can kind of continue doing whatever they want within the app, and then eventually they will see the photo or video in their like AdPipe library. This can all happen without really, like if the user decides to stay on the page will eventually update with the library without them having to refresh, without them having to navigate away or something like that. So it ends up being a really seamless user experience where they kind of just feel like everything just sort of magically happens. The other thing with this is that it also allows for longer processing times where you can essentially do like a user request and action, and then the server takes its time because you don't have an HTTP client open, like waiting for a response. So it really leverages the whole pub subsystem that Elixir has already built out pretty extensively in order to continuously update the client, because the client is not dependent on strict updates from the browser. And so yeah, we've had this success in using this like advantage, or this to our advantage with APIs that might take a really long time to run, for example. So, a user might just, an external API that might take really long to run. So for example, if somebody were using like ChatGPT through our app, as an example, it might take a while for us to get a response from that API. But because there's no HTTP client open, we're not really worried about how long it takes. We can just kind of ask that external API to do its thing, and then when we get a response back, we can just send a message to that LiveView saying, hey, here's the information you requested, and then LiveView will just push that information to the browser. Okay, so a little bit about more specifically on why we've really been having success with LiveView, in my opinion. I think, and I think a lot of my teammates would agree, we've been moving pretty fast as a development team. Like quite literally, our development speed has been very quick, and we've been pretty efficient, I think, given that we have like 7 engineers with the amount that we've been able to push out, especially in the last 9 or 10 months alone. And so I just want to talk a little bit about why we think LiveView has really like powered us forward. I should say we've all worked at startups like this before. Most of us have worked together at previous jobs, so we do have that general like camaraderie coming in, but even with our past experience, this has definitely been one of the more seamless, for sure. Okay, so using JavaScript has been a lot less painless than we thought it would be, which has been super helpful when trying to use what LiveView calls a hook, which basically just allows you to like open a gate into some JavaScript that kind of just like flows into the browser. So handling For example, as I mentioned, it's a photo and video product. Handling the different ways of uploading of the files mainly occurs on the browser side, and so handling that upload has been pretty seamless and easy to reuse across multiple pages. So it's not like we have like a singular place in the app where you can like upload photos or videos, right? So we've been able to easily reuse pieces of our code with how easy these JavaScript hooks are. It also allows us to easily handle different states in the uploading process. So because the browser goes directly to S3, where it eventually ends up, we can still keep tabs on how that upload is going, and the JavaScript can send messages to LiveView saying, hey, here's like the progress, or oops, it went wrong. And so LiveView can then update by itself to say, oh, and like show this to the user really easily. LiveView also has prided itself on how it has made uploading files easy. I don't know if you're all aware, but they did release like Phoenix LiveView version like 1, the like release, like the early release or whatever, a couple days ago. And in it, specifically the article that Chris McCord had written, in his own words, they made something that was historically painful less painful. And as something that, as a product that also needs to take advantage of these file uploads, that has made our lives a lot easier. I remember before I started and everyone was telling me what the product was, I was like, I don't know about a photo video thing, that sounds kind of hard. I don't know how that's gonna work. And it was just like a general sort of like apprehension I think I had coming in. But when I got into the code, it was surprisingly easy, and I was shocked at the level of support that LiveView had for this. Let's see. The other last point I want to mention on the photo video uploading is that there is a sort of semblance of perceived performance and actual performance. So to the user, this all happens fairly quickly because of the continuous feedback loop, right? We know that if a user continually sees some kind of update or some kind of information, they feel like it's moving faster than maybe it actually is. And because we can provide such granular updates like, oh, your upload is 10% done, 12% done, et cetera, we can kind of make them feel like it's moving fast and without too much code actually written. We're not going out of our way to show the user all this information. Because so much of it comes built in, the perceived performance ends up being pretty good, but the actual performance is also solid, right? Elixir, we all know, is fast. Latency is great with LiveView. There's no shortage. I do want to emphasize the actual performance is also good. Yeah, okay, next slide. Testing. This is something that I have personally been getting a little bit more involved in since I had joined, so I'm proud of where we've come so far in our integration testing efforts specifically for Phoenix LiveView. It has, it's got minimal docs. I don't know if anyone's ever looked at it. It's kind of funny. It's it looks like it's sparse, but I can very confidently say I don't think I've ever needed more. There have definitely been a couple times where I'm like, oh, how can I do this or that? And it's just very here and there, and the docs are sparse, but they cover everything. The one problem I would say we've had is handling asynchronous operations. We had an old mocking library and we're switching over, but overall, aside from that, writing integration tests has been so easy. We are testing essentially from the point that a user clicks a button to the database change and then the LiveView change that accompanies it. So that has made it super easy to refactor, essentially just makes for good code coverage. At our stage, we Refactor often, it's a startup, we have some expectation of moving reasonably fast. But obviously, new information comes in, and so you're like, oh, I could have built this better if I'd known this beforehand. But having the opportunity to go back and refactor with excellent tests in place that test pretty much anything that can happen on a page has made it so, so much easier. Lastly, our engineering processes can be a little bit streamlined because of this. So we don't really have a true segmentation between front end and back end, right? It's not like a traditional single page application where you're, you've got like, these are the UI engineers, they don't touch the back end, right? It's not like that. We have UI engineers who also work on database stuff, and we have full stacks who are very happy to go in and do the UI things. This makes it a lot easier to kind of like split up our tasks. It's been a little bit different because, historically when you think about feature breakdown, you might be like, okay, like these are the front end cards, these are the back end cards, everybody go. And so now we're actually looking at like longer slices of work, which admittedly does occasionally make it a little bit more difficult, but for the most part, it does kind of make it easy to like neatly create features all at once at a time. This also means our QA processes can be streamlined, where our QA isn't like booting up Postman to test an API and then testing like an empty like front end that doesn't really do much yet. They're testing everything completely end to end as a whole feature. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about drawbacks of LiveView, but after that, I have left a good amount of time for questions. I think the process has been super interesting in using LiveView, and I definitely just want to hear more about like what everyone's thoughts are on how to use it, how to adopt it, that sort of thing. So, yes. Just pretend. We'll get to that. Yeah, that's fair. Okay, so we'll get there. So drawbacks of LiveView. So one thing to mention is that a lot of us have come from a like Ruby on Rails, like even Java background, where pretty much anyone who has ever had an opinion on how to organize that code has written about it, talked about it, beat you over the head with it, all of it. So when it comes time to figure out, oh, what should I do in this controller? Everyone's got an opinion, right? It's like, okay? Like everybody likes the little small controllers and like all of that. With LiveView, it's not so much apparent. People have opinions for sure, but the ecosystem is new enough that they're not ingrained. And this goes for Elixir and Phoenix, but especially for LiveView, where it is super, super new. We definitely ran into a thing where we were like, oh, it would be interesting to see how we should organize state in the socket, for example. Another one that we came across often was, okay, like we can make components that are reusable, but if we're attaching user interactions to those components, how do you reuse the handle events on the server that accompany those versus just putting a bunch of copy and pasting handle events across LiveViews? And so we've come up with patterns, and like personally, this doesn't feel as much of a drawback. I actually enjoy it a lot. It's kind of like you just get to like pick something and run with it and say like, okay, this feels like this is a natural way to like handle this as an abstraction. Let's just see what happens. And we've been able to put in a lot of interesting things that work for our use case in that way. So, when we talk about the like Ruby on Rails or Java, like general abstractions or things like that, people talk a lot about trade-offs and what makes different patterns good for your use case and understanding when it makes sense to use different patterns. For us, we've kind of just been like, well, we can just custom make our own patterns. Nobody's really describing like, hey, this is the best way to write LiveView. We can kind of just make something that makes sense for us for now. PRs can get large. There is a bit of it that is boilerplate sometimes, admittedly. But because of the fact that I mentioned, there's long slices of features, the slice can get long. So it is easy to unintentionally make PRs that are like casually like 700, 800 lines long without really realizing can get away from you a little bit. So obviously reviewing becomes like a slight problem, and then QA and so on. I don't know how much of this to attribute to LiveView versus, well, should we just be making our tasks smaller? Who's to say? And then hiring. Yeah, I mentioned we've had the benefit of working with people that we have worked with in the past, again, at this job for the most part. The Elixir community in Atlanta is alive and kicking, but it was small. Not that we hire only Atlanta, but that's where we all started working in Atlanta. And we're all spread apart now. We work remotely, but even still, the Elixir community is not enormous. And then when you take a slice of that as like, okay, how do you feel about only working in Elixir, right? Like a lot of Elixir devs I meet are like, well, we use like React here, or like we use Ruby on Rails. We're saying, actually, the only thing you're working on Elixir is Elixir for a while. And so it's not a difficult sell, but it is something that we're kind of aware of, like, you need to want to only work in Elixir, even if you're a UI engineer. So there's that. But finally, also there's the aspect of training juniors. That's something that I don't think we've quite figured out how to tackle yet, but this idea of how do we teach somebody who's never worked in a production environment what functional programming is, and then get them to understand on another level how Phoenix LiveView works. A lot of people come out of boot camps or degree programs or whatever it is, even self-taught, mostly learning like Node, some form of JavaScript, some kind of like React, maybe like Java, Ruby on Rails. But yeah, all very object-oriented. So trying to teach them Elixir feels like a pretty big jump that I'm not really sure how we're going to tackle when the time comes. Stay tuned, maybe that'll be another conference talk. And then yeah, finally, it would, let's see, you theoretically could reuse parts of it for a mobile app. LiveView Native does exist, thank you. But let's say you wanted to do that today or a month ago. We were basically thinking about like, okay, I guess we're gonna use React Native, which would mean that you basically have to like rebuild your front end, and then we don't have any APIs, right? Like we've built everything in LiveViews, so there's no API that we can work out of to be like, oh, well, at least we can reuse this part. No, we can't. So yes, frameworks like LiveView Native will eventually become, hopefully, the norm that we can actually, hopefully one day, reuse as a mobile app. But yeah, that is all from me. So